too much noise today. I just need the road, the rain, and the hum of the engine.
Have you ever felt like there's a part of you don't really understand? Like, you're not sure who you really are anymore? I've been there too. Let me share something with you. Maybe it'll help you see things a little clearer. There are days when I wake up and it already feels like the world is too loud, too sharp. Like the air carries weight and I haven't even opened the curtains yet. It's strange how quickly a small moment, a text left unanswered, a passing glance that feels too cold, someone's offhand comment, can unravel something inside. I used to think this sensitivity was weakness, that if I were stronger, things wouldn't get to me the way they do. But the truth is, for a long time, I didn't know where I ended and the world began. Everything bled into me. People's moods, their expectations, the chaos of the news, the pressure to stay relevant, stay calm, stay fine. And somewhere along the way, I started to lose the sense of who I actually was beneath all that noise. I remember this one afternoon. I was standing in the kitchen, staring out the window, watching the wind twist the leaves. Something had gone wrong that morning, a misunderstanding with someone I cared about, and it had left me feeling gutted, not because of what was said exactly, but because of how easily it knocked me off center. I thought to myself, why am I so affected by everything? Why do other people seem fine, while I fall apart over the smallest thing? I didn't have answers then, but I had that aching sense that something needed to change. I started reading more, Jung mostly. His words felt like someone had finally looked inside me and named the things I couldn't. He spoke about the inner world like it was a landscape worth tending to, rather than escaping from. That hit me. I'd spent so much time trying to control everything outside me, relationships, impressions, outcomes, and almost no time trying to understand what was going on within me. The idea that true freedom comes from within, it wasn't just a nice quote anymore. It became something I desperately wanted to believe, because the alternative was this constant feeling of being at the mercy of a world, endlessly reactive, always a step behind. There was a particular quote that stopped me. Who looks outside, dreams. Who looks inside, awakes. I remember staring at it and realizing I had done nothing but look outside my whole life. For validation, for permission, for peace. So I started doing something I never thought I would. I stopped blaming the world. I stopped blaming people for making me feel a certain way. Instead, I started asking, why did this hurt so much? What part of me was triggered? What story am I telling myself about this situation? At first, it felt like I was walking through fog. But slowly, patterns began to reveal themselves. I noticed that I reacted most strongly when I felt unseen, when I felt dismissed or misunderstood. It wasn't the events themselves, it was the meanings I attached to them. Somewhere deep down, I had equated being misunderstood with being unloved. That was the real wound, and knowing that didn't instantly fix things. But it gave me a map. It gave me a starting point. There's something incredibly empowering about realizing you don't have to be a victim of your own emotions. That you can sit with discomfort, examine it, even talk to it. Like, hey anger, I see you. What are you here to show me? It sounds strange, I know, but when I started treating my inner world as something worthy of attention, not shame, everything began to shift. I won't pretend it's easy. Some days I still spiral. I still catch myself reacting to things that, in hindsight, weren't about the present at all. They were echoes from old pain, old beliefs. But the difference now is that I catch it. I see it. And in that awareness, there's power. I used to think strength meant being unaffected, stoic. But now I understand strength as something softer. It's the ability to remain connected to yourself even when the world feels chaotic. It's being rooted in who you are, so the winds don't carry you away. That day in the kitchen, watching the wind, something small shifted. I didn't numb myself. I didn't blame the other person. I just let myself feel, and then I asked what that feeling was trying to tell me. That was the beginning, and maybe that's where I'd tell anyone else to begin too. not with trying to change the world, but with looking inward, gently, curiously, asking yourself, where does this pain really come from? And what is it trying to wake me up to? Because sometimes what looks like the world being against you is really your own soul asking you to come home. There was this moment, maybe you've had one like it, where I realized that almost every emotion I was feeling wasn't actually coming from the situation itself, but from what I believed about it. Like my brain was running this constant background script. If they're upset with me, I must have done something wrong. If I didn't text back, I must not matter. If something goes wrong, it's probably my fault. I started to see how much of my life had been shaped by unconscious assumptions. Assumptions I never even stopped to question. They were just there, built into me like a second skin. And most dangerous part, I thought they were facts. But that's when I began to understand what it means to truly look inward. Not just to feel your emotions, but to ask where they come from, what feeds them, what beliefs hold them in place. That's what Jung was pointing to when he spoke about consciousness as a form of transformation. It's not just about self-reflection. It's about taking ownership of what's happening inside you. Learning to pause and ask, is this reaction really mine? Or is it something I learned? Something I absorbed to survive? I remember sitting alone one evening, just writing down all the things I believed about myself, but had never questioned. I'm too much. I'm never enough. I should be more composed. I should be less sensitive. I should be easier to love. It was devastating, honestly, to see it all laid out like that. Like reading a manual someone else had written for me without my consent. But it was also the first time I had power over those beliefs. Because I could finally see them. That's the thing no one tells you. Your mind will keep feeding you the same stories until you interrupt the cycle. And the only way to interrupt it is by becoming aware of it. The more I did this, the more I started to experience a strange kind of calm. Not all the time. I still got triggered, still had moments of self-doubt. But something had changed. I wasn't as identified with those feelings anymore. I could feel the anger or sadness rise up, but instead of being swept away by it, I could sit beside it. I could be curious. There was one night, it sounds small, but it meant everything to me. I had a hard conversation with someone close to me, and for the first time, I didn't panic. I didn't try to fix their emotions or make myself the villain. I just listened, felt the wave come, and let it pass without losing myself. That was the first time I felt truly free. Because in that moment, I realized I don't have to be ruled by what's happening around me. I don't have to hand over the keys to my peace every time something outside shifts. That's what Jung meant when he said freedom starts inside. It's not about becoming detached or cold. It's about becoming grounded, knowing where you stand, knowing that your worth, your peace, your truth, they live in you, not in anyone else's hands. And yeah, it's uncomfortable at first. Looking inward means facing a lot of things you'd rather avoid. Your fears, your insecurities, the ways you've betrayed yourself to be accepted. But there's something beautiful that happens when you stop running from all that. You start to feel whole. Not perfect, not always happy, but real. And realness, that grounded, messy, authentic self, is the most solid place to live from. You begin to respond to life instead of reacting. You start to notice what's yours to carry and what's not. And little by little, the need for approval, the fear of rejection, the chaos of other people's emotions, it all stops feeling like life or death. Because you know who you are, and more importantly, you trust who you are. That kind of clarity, it's the beginning of something sacred. It's not a final destination, but a doorway. The first act of rebellion against a world that constantly tells you to look outward for your answers is to look inward and say, I'll find my own. That's where real change begins. It took me a long time to realize just how deeply I was wired to seek approval. Not in a loud or obvious way. I wasn't always trying to please everyone, not consciously. But underneath so many of my choices was this subtle, persistent need to be accepted, to be understood, to be seen in a certain light. And the craziest part? I didn't even know I was doing it. I thought I was just being considerate, thoughtful, easygoing. But slowly I started noticing this pattern. I'd say yes when I meant no, laugh when I felt hurt, stay quiet when something really bothered me. I was shape-shifting to keep peace, to avoid judgment, to not make things uncomfortable. But it was uncomfortable, just not for them, for me. There was this one situation that still sits with me. I was in a conversation where someone made a passive-aggressive comment about a life choice I'd made, and I laughed it off. I smiled like it didn't touch me, but inside, I felt this deep sting, like I had abandoned myself again. I remember going home that night and thinking, why do I keep doing this? Why am I so afraid of disappointing people, even when they clearly don't respect me? And that was the moment I saw it, the invisible chain. I had been living my life, trying to earn something that couldn't be earned. Unconditional love, safety, worth. Somewhere along the way, I had internalized this belief that to be loved, I had to be good, easy to be around, non-threatening, agreeable. And so I shrank myself, smoothed the edges, made sure I didn't take up too much space. But that version of me wasn't me. It was a carefully constructed mask, a self I had crafted for the sake of being accepted. That realization broke me open, because it meant that much of the pain I'd felt in relationships wasn't just about other people not seeing me. It was about me not letting myself be seen. I wasn't just hurt by their comments. I was hurt by my own silence. Jung talked about this, how we become trapped by the personas we wear. Not because we're fake, but because we're afraid. Afraid that if we show who we really are, messy, emotional, contradictory, we'll be rejected, abandoned, unloved. And yet, the longer we live in those masks, the lonelier we become. Even when we're surrounded by people, there's this ache. Because deep down, we know they love the version of me I'm performing, not the one I truly am. That's a devastating feeling. But it's also where the healing begins. I started asking myself, what would it look like to stop performing? To stop curating my life for others' comfort? To say what I actually feel, even if my voice shakes? To take up space without apologizing? It wasn't easy. In fact, at first it was terrifying. I lost some people, not in dramatic explosions, but in slow fades. People who liked the me that made things easy for them didn't always stick around when I stopped doing that. But you know what? The people who stayed, they saw me, really saw me. And even more importantly, I began to see myself. I started noticing when I was making choices from fear instead of love. I began to pause before saying yes, to check if I actually meant it. I allowed myself to be misunderstood sometimes, to disappoint people when it was necessary for me to be true. And every time I did, it got a little easier. Every time I chose myself, I felt a little freer. This is what no one tells you. You don't owe anyone a version of you that keeps you small. You don't need to be liked by everyone to be lovable. You don't need to be understood to be worthy. Approval is a moving target. You'll never hit it perfectly. But authenticity, that's yours to claim. And it doesn't require anyone's permission. When you stop living for the eyes watching you, you start living from the truth inside you. That truth may not always be comfortable, but it's real. And realness, even when it's raw or messy, is the soil where freedom grows. So now, whenever I catch myself hesitating to be honest, I gently ask, are you doing this out of love for yourself or fear of losing someone else's approval? That one question has changed so much for me. Because love, real love, honest love, doesn't demand that you shrink. It meets you where you are and holds space for who you're becoming. And maybe that's what we're all learning to do. To love ourselves enough to stop performing. To trust that who we are, unpolished, unfiltered, is enough. One of the hardest truths I had to face was this. For years, I was wearing a mask so well, I almost believed it was my real face. Not the theatrical kind, not something flashy or dramatic. No, this was a quiet mask, a subtle one, the kind you build out of necessity when you don't feel safe enough to be your whole self. It was made of politeness, agreeableness, productivity, being easy to love. It smiled at the right moments, nodded even when something felt wrong, stayed quiet to keep the peace. It made me seem like I had it all together, calm, balanced, emotionally stable. But underneath, I was exhausted, because the thing about masks is that they're heavy, especially when you wear them every day. They don't just hide your face, they smother your soul. And even if no one else can see the difference, you can. There's a dull ache that starts to grow, the ache of being known but not really known, the ache of playing a role instead of being alive. There's this pressure in our world to perform who we are, to fit into molds, to be palatable, especially when you're someone who's sensitive or introspective or different in some way. You're taught, subtly and sometimes not so subtly, that being you is too much, too weird, too sad, too intense, too whatever. So you adapt. You start editing yourself. I used to think this was just part of growing up, learning how to function in society. But now I see it for what it was. Fear. Fear of rejection. Fear of judgment. Fear that if I showed up unfiltered, people would leave. That I'd lose love. That I'd be alone. And that fear, it's not irrational. It comes from somewhere real. Somewhere old. For a lot of us, it's rooted in childhood. In the ways we learned to earn love, avoid punishment, stay safe. We became masters of self-containment because it was what we needed to survive. But what helped us survive then is often what keeps us stuck now. I remember the first time I tried taking a mask off, just a little. I said something out loud that I had always kept hidden. It wasn't dramatic, just an honest, vulnerable sentence. But even as I said it, I felt my whole body tense up, waiting for judgment. And when it didn't come, when the world didn't fall apart, I realized something. Maybe it's safe now. Maybe I don't have to hide anymore. That was a turning point for me. I started noticing how often I filter myself, how I softened my voice, adjusted my tone, laughed when I want to cry, held back my truth to avoid rocking the boat. I noticed how I said, "I'm fine," when I wasn't, how I smiled through things that hurt. And with each little moment of honesty, each time I let the mask slip, I felt something shift. It was like breathing deeper after holding your breath for too long. But here's the thing. Taking off the mask doesn't guarantee you'll be met with warmth or understanding. Sometimes people will be uncomfortable with your truth. Sometimes they'll withdraw or criticize or dismiss. That's real. But what's also real is the quiet power of standing in your authenticity, even when it's not applauded. Because the moment you start choosing your truth over your image, even in small ways, is the moment you start reclaiming your life. You stop living for other people's comfort. You stop organizing yourself around who you think you should be. And you start asking, who am I really beneath all this performance? What do I feel? What do I want? What matters to me? And maybe the scariest part is, at first, you don't always know the answers. Because when you've been living in masks for a long time, your true self becomes a whisper. But with patience and gentleness, that whisper gets louder. Jung talked about the danger of identification with the persona, that social face we wear. When we forget that it's just a role, we start confusing it with our identity. We lose touch with our shadow, our complexity, our truth. But when we begin to peel back the layers, to acknowledge our anger, our longing, our weirdness, our wildness, we begin to feel alive again. Not perfect, not always easy, but real. That's what I'm learning now. Realness is messy, but it's magnetic. It draws in the people who are meant to see you. It opens the door to relationships rooted in truth, not performance. And most importantly, it reconnects you to yourself. So if you're wearing a mask right now, even a soft one, I get it. I wore mine for years. But maybe, just maybe, you don't have to anymore. There's something no one ever really prepares you for. How painful it can be to face your own wounds. Not just acknowledge them, but sit with them. Look at them. Hold them. And maybe, for the first time in your life, stop trying to fix them or hide them or explain them away. I remember one evening, I was sitting alone with this heavy sense of grief. Nothing dramatic had just happened. No crisis in sight. But it was all there, years of not being chosen, of being misunderstood, of trying so hard to be enough, and always falling just short in my own eyes. It came in like a wave. No warning. Just a soft, slow ache that pressed into my chest. And instead of distracting myself, instead of texting someone or watching a show or spiraling into overthinking, I stayed with it. I didn't run. I just let the sadness be there. I cried for everything I hadn't let myself cry about. And in the middle of that pain, something surprising happened. I didn't feel broken. I felt human, more whole than I had in years. Like I had finally stopped abandoning myself. That's when I understood what shadow work really means. It's not some mystical process reserved for philosophers or therapists. It's choosing every day to face the parts of yourself you were taught to reject. The anger, the fear, the shame, the neediness, the jealousy, the sorrow. Not to act on them blindly, but to listen to them, to understand why they're there. Because those parts of you, they were born from something. They didn't just appear out of nowhere. Most of them formed when you were too young to protect yourself, too small to say, "This hurts." So instead, you coped. You split off the pain. You buried it. And now, as an adult, it leaks out in all kinds of ways. Anxiety, people-pleasing, perfectionism, emotional numbness. And then we judge ourselves for it. We call ourselves dramatic, broken, too sensitive, too complicated. But what if we stopped judging those reactions and started honoring the wounds beneath them? That's what changed everything for me. I stopped asking what's wrong with me and started asking what happened to me. What did I need that I didn't get? And how can I give that to myself now? I stopped treating my pain like a problem to fix. I began to treat it like a part of me that was still waiting to be seen. That shift from shame to compassion was monumental. It's not easy work. There were days I felt completely raw, like everything inside me had been scraped clean. But the more I stayed with it, the more I discovered something incredible. My pain wasn't just pain. It was a doorway, a map, a guide. Every fear, every pattern, every emotional overreaction, it was showing me something. And as I followed those clues inward, I began to reclaim pieces of myself I hadn't realized I'd lost. The scared little kid who never felt safe. The teenager who never felt wanted. The adult who kept performing, hoping someone would say, "You're enough just as you are." I met them all. I held them close. I told them, "I see you now. I'm not leaving you again." Jung said, "One does not become enlightened by imagining figures of light, but by making the darkness conscious." And God, that is true. You don't heal by pretending everything is fine. You heal by walking into your shadow and realizing it's not a monster. It's a mirror. And that mirror reflects back all the places where love was missing. Not just from others, but from you. It's easy to get stuck in the trap of thinking healing means getting over it. But real healing isn't linear. It's circular, spiral-shaped. You come back to the same wounds, but each time with more tenderness, more wisdom, more space. And slowly, the pain transforms. It stops being the thing that defines you and becomes the thing that deepens you. Makes you softer, wiser, more awake. That's the unexpected gift of emotional pain. It breaks your heart open wide enough for truth to enter. You learn to sit with discomfort without needing to escape. You learn to hold grief like an old friend. You stop waiting for someone else to come rescue you and realize, I can be the one I've been waiting for. That's where the power is. Not in avoiding pain, but in becoming intimate with it. Learning its language. Letting it shape you. Not into someone bitter or closed, but into someone fierce and compassionate and real. So if you're hurting right now, if your heart feels like it's unraveling, I just want to say this. You're not broken. You're breaking open. There's a difference. One is an end. The other is a beginning. One of the biggest turning points for me was the moment I realized I didn't have to believe everything I felt. That sounds strange, right? For so long, I assumed that if I felt it, it must be true. If I felt abandoned, I must be unlovable. If I felt anxious, there must be danger. If I felt guilt, I must have done something wrong. My emotions were the judge, jury, and executioner. But the more I learned to observe instead of obey, the more I started to see. Emotions are messengers, not masters. They rise up in response to something, sometimes from the present moment, but often from old stories, old patterns, unhealed memories. And while they're always valid, they're not always accurate. That shift from identification to observation was like stepping out of a storm and realizing you've been holding the umbrella the whole time. I started practicing this small, quiet habit. When I felt something intense, I'd take a breath and ask, what is this really about? What part of me is speaking right now? Sometimes it was the child who didn't feel heard. Sometimes it was the teenager who was terrified of being left. Sometimes it was the adult me, overwhelmed by pressure and pretending to be fine. And instead of reacting, instead of lashing out or shutting down, I try to just stay with myself. Not to fix it, just to be there. That's what emotional sovereignty really is. It's not about controlling your feelings. It's about being with them without letting them take over the steering wheel. Jung said that when we don't make the unconscious conscious, it controls our lives, and we call it fate. And that hit me hard, because so much of my life had fell out of my hands, not because of what was happening, but because I wasn't aware of what was happening inside me. I was letting unconscious wounds drive conscious choices. But awareness changes that. It doesn't make the fear go away overnight or the anger dissolve on command, but it gives you space. Space to breathe, space to choose, space to respond instead of react. I started seeing my emotions less like enemies and more like signals. Anxiety became a clue that I needed safety. Sadness became a sign I needed connection. Anger became a boundary I hadn't honored. The more I listened, the less I feared them. One day, after a really difficult conversation, I felt this huge wave of shame rising up in me. That old voice came back. You messed up. You're too much. You shouldn't have said that. But instead of spiraling, I paused. I placed my hand on my chest and said, I'm here. I am listening. You're not alone. And it sounds simple, maybe even silly, but that moment changed something. I realized I could parent myself, that I could bring the compassion I always wanted from others and offer it to the parts of me that were scared, hurt, confused. It didn't erase the discomfort, but it helped me stay grounded in the middle of it. That's the real gift of emotional awareness. It doesn't make life easier, but it makes you stronger. Not in a hardened, armored way, in a tender, resilient way, like a tree that bends with the wind but doesn't break. And the more you practice it, the more you start to trust yourself. You begin to realize that you're not as fragile as you feared, that you can feel deeply and still hold steady, that your emotions don't have to be threats, they can be guides. You also stop taking things so personally, not because you don't care, but because you understand everyone is reacting from their own wounds, their own fears, their own projections. What others say or do is rarely about you. And that realization, it's liberating, because it means you can stop living in reaction to the world. You can start living in relationship with yourself. That inner connection becomes your anchor, the calm center you return to, no matter what chaos is happening around you. And over time, this becomes your new normal. Not numbing, not detaching, but being fully alive and fully steady. Emotional sovereignty isn't about becoming invincible. It's about becoming intimate with your inner world, so nothing can pull you away from it. It's a quiet power, a grounded presence, a knowing deep in your bones that no matter what happens out there, you've got you. And that's everything. There was a time in my life when every little thing could shake me. A look, a word, a delay, a disappointment. I didn't just feel my emotions, I became them. If someone pulled away, I unraveled. If I was criticized, I questioned my worth. If plans changed, I felt abandoned. It was exhausting. I thought strength meant having thick skin, being untouchable. But I've come to believe something different. Real strength is knowing exactly how soft you are and not letting that stop you from standing tall. That's the paradox. You become untouchable not by becoming harder, but by becoming truer. When you know who you are, not the curated version, not the one others expect, but the messy, raw, beautiful truth of you, nothing can truly shake that. You're not immune to pain, but you're no longer defined by it. There's this quiet kind of freedom that comes when you stop trying to control the world around you and start tending to the world within. When you stop chasing approval and begin to offer yourself acceptance. When you stop performing and begin living. And this isn't some mountaintop enlightenment moment. It's a daily practice. It's choosing again and again to return to yourself, especially on the hard days, especially when the fear creeps in, especially when you feel like backsliding into old patterns. It's whispering to yourself, you're still here. You're still worthy. Keep going. I've learned that true peace isn't the absence of conflict. It's the presence of self. A deep knowing that no matter what happens around you, you don't have to abandon yourself to survive it. That's what Jung meant by individuation. Not isolation, not perfection, but wholeness, integration. A life where all your parts, the shadow, the light, the fear, the strength, all have a seat at the table. It doesn't mean you won't get hurt. You will. It doesn't mean you won't doubt. You will. But it means you won't betray yourself in the process. I've had conversations lately that would have broken me before. Now, they just move through me. Not because I don't care, but because I no longer collapse under the weight of someone else's emotions. I can witness without absorbing. I can love without losing myself. That's the gift of doing this work, of shadow integration, of self-acceptance, of emotional awareness. You become a steady presence in your own life. You become someone you can rely on. And from that place, you can show up in the world in a way that's not reactive, but rooted. Not grasping, but giving. Not afraid, but aligned. You start making decisions from your values, not your wounds. You start saying no, not from fear, but from clarity. You start loving from overflow, not desperation. And maybe most beautifully, you stop asking for permission to be yourself. You just are. Not everyone will understand this version of you. Some will miss the mask. Some will walk away. But those who stay, and those you draw on along the way, will meet you in the deepest, truest way. And most importantly, you will meet yourself. Fully, honestly, tenderly. And in that meeting, you'll discover that you were never broken. Just buried. Just waiting. Just becoming. So if you've read this far, maybe you're ready. Ready to step into that version of you who doesn't chase love, but lives from it. Who doesn't fear emotions, but welcomes them. Who doesn't shrink for comfort, but expands for truth. That version of you isn't far away. They're already here, and they've been waiting for you to come home. If this felt meaningful to you, it might mean something to someone else too. So hit like, leave a comment, or subscribe. That's how YouTube knows to share it with others. Maybe together, we can help someone see things a little differently.